Hi, this is an unscripted tutorial on how to build forms along with nested forms and an introduction to strong parameters. It's unscripted because we're going to go through this, build this. You'll see the real process. If errors come up, you'll see how we resolve those. So first off, we're going to create an application that is basically a user's database, and for the nested attributes, or for the nested forms, we're going to each user logically will have one driver's license, but we're going to put the driver's license in a separate table, so that's why we'll use the nested form. So first off, we're going to create our application. Rails new drivers. And this is Rails 4.0. And after that's done bundling, we'll get started. All right. So, let's see here. Let's just check to make sure everything's working here. Okay. Everything's working. All right. So, now let's create our users, and this is kind of also a little walkthrough on some CRUD basics as well. Rails G controller drivers index new. We're just going to do an index and a new. We're not going to do a show page or anything else, at least right off the bat. So we'll generate those. And let's wire those up here to begin with. Open a new terminal here. Bigger. Okay. And I'm going to use Vim for my editor. You can use whatever you want. So the generator added those two things. We don't need that. We are just going to, this is going to be a RESTful interface, so we will do that is what we did, right? Drivers, yes. Okay, so save that. Now when we go to drivers, we also need to open another one. Okay, now we can see our index, and we also should be able to see our new page. Okay, so we're going to start with the new page because we don't have anything to display on the index page yet. So let's start creating our. Before we start creating our form, I'll generally go ahead and create the model. So we're doing a singular here because that's the convention. A singular model, the base table will be plural, and the controller name is plural. So driver, we're going to have first name, and we're going to have string last name, string, and we're going to do that for now. Now if we head back over to our editor here, we look at the DB file and the migration file, we have this create drivers, and we can see the first name, last name as string attributes, as well as a timestamp for when these records are updated and created. And so now that we have that, now if we try and reload the page, it's going to tell us we need to migrate. So we do that. Migrating just runs that migration script that we just looked at, and it updates the database. So now we should be good. So now we really just need to start building our form here. If we look at our driver model, we have nothing in here yet. And so if we look at the controller, let me navigate this way there for you. App, controllers, drivers controller, new index here. So we want to create a driver.new. This will be the basis for our form. Now, if we go to app, views, drivers, new, here's our form. We'll leave that there. And now we need to actually start putting our form. This is a model-backed form, so we're going to go over, we're going to use the form4 and friends, and we're going to put in that driver that we just created, and then do and F. And the F here, you may wonder what that is. The F is actually the form builder. And the form builder is just, it's not actually the driver that's going to be yielded to that. It's an object that represents the form, but knows about the driver that we pass to form4 right here, and can intelligently call and repopulate data out of the object. So when we have first name in here, if the driver has a first name, it'll display the first name automatically in the input field. And that'll all make sense here in a second. So every new form needs to have a submit button. So let's do that, and then let's bounce over here, and now we see we have a form. And I want to pop in here right away and show you guys what's going on here. So we have the form up here. You can see it. The action is drivers. That's where it's going to submit to. It's going to be a post request, and then the only other thing we've added here is the submit button at the end. And this div here that's hidden essentially is some extra parameters that Rails adds for you for security purposes. Okay, so the next item that we need to do here is start adding our fields. We're just going to do a div here. So the first thing that we're going to use is label. And we want first name. And let's add a BR after that just for fun. And then the next thing we're going to use is text field first. And when we save that, bounce over here, now we have the first name. So let's take a look here at how it created this input for us. So what it does is our form builder here wraps a driver object, and so what Rails does, it says, okay, when it that's how it uses naming conventions to name the labels, and that way it'll know how to parse this form on the way back out. Once we submit it back to the server, it'll know what things go where, or we will know what things go where. So the first thing here is driver. So it says, okay, I'm wrapping a driver object. It calls the class on there, lowercase it, and it puts that as the first argument, or the first set of symbols here on the name. So that goes there, and then it uses this kind of Ruby hash-like syntax, and this can go several layers deep. However, we only have one layer deep here, and so, but that's why it creates driver first name, because it's a driver object. It wouldn't matter if we change this. If we change this to fast driver, and change this fast driver, when we reload the page here and look at those parameters, it's still going to be driver, because it's actually looking at the type of object, which happens to be driver. So we'll pull that back and do that, save that, and now we still have our form here. So let's do the same thing here. Now we have our form here. Now I'm not going to put anything in here because I just don't want to try, because I know that when I hit create, it's going to say, create doesn't exist. So app controllers drivers controller, and now if we do create reload, now it says, now it's working. It found the create action, but there is no create.html.erb, so it's blowing up here. So we need to do something else. We're going to do optionally two different things here. So I'm going to start at the top of the create method. First, we need to actually instigate driver.new here, and then we need to pass in the params here. And in order to show you, I think we can do this. I want to show you what we're getting here, and I'm going to do render text. I think I can do this. Params.inspect, and just to comment this out, just so that you know it's not going to do anything here. So when I do that, it'll print out to the screen what my parameters are. And so the interesting things that we want is this right here. So if we go back to our form here and we say, what will be my name? Matt Smith, create driver, we see that there's a hash in here, and it has driver as a key, and then another hash here with first name key pointing at value Matt, last name key pointing at Smith. So that is how Rails got the information out of this, out of these parameters here. It looked at this and parsed this and knows that, okay, we have a key of driver and then another hash with key of first name, and then the value of this input is the value in the hash. See how that makes sense? Driver, and then in the square brackets we had first name, and then the value of the form is the value in this hash. So one new change though, comment this out for now, in Rails 4 is that we cannot just no longer do params driver and just pass in our driver, because as you know we can do something like driver equals driver.new first name Matt, yada yada yada. We can do that, but because that's a hash being passed in. But if we look at actually what params dot class, if we do that, oh, and I have to comment that out because that's exactly what I was meaning to show you, is that this is action controller parameters. This is not a hash. So this works because it's a hash, but the controller passes us a special kind of hash called parameters, and it does two things. Number one, it lets us access things. It lets us access things via symbols rather than using the strings that we saw previously. We can also see those strings in here. Starting the post here to drivers, we can see that these are strings. We can access it either way, via symbols or strings. That's the first thing it does for us. And then the second thing it does is it says if it's action controller parameters, we have to call special methods on it in order to whitelist what we pass into our model. This is a security feature of Rails that can't be bypassed anymore. So what we're going to do is we're going to call params dot, and I'm going to put this on a new line because it might get kind of long. So we're going to do params dot require, and if you remember, our key is driver. So what we're going to do is driver. We're going to require that. If that's not there, then we want it to throw an error. And then we're going to permit and we're going to permit first name and last name. Now, if you take a look here, first name and last name, those coincide with first name and last name here. So now we can go ahead and do something with this object. And we'll do the same render text. And then let's do inspect. So now when we refresh this page here, Ah. Maybe if we just do driver. Anyways, just want 2s interpretation of that. Continue. Okay, well, it's the browser's probably trying to do something funny with it. Yes, it's trying to interpret that as HTML, and it's not working out for us. So, we don't need it anyways. So the bottom line was it didn't blow up. And so now we can do something with this driver. If driver.save, because that's ultimately what we want to do when we create something. Saves redirect to, and we're going to do drivers index. Else, if it doesn't save, which we're really going to exercise too much here in this screencast, we want to go to new. So we haven't talked about validation, so unless there's really something wrong there, it's always pretty much going to save. So now, when we do this, oh, nobody caught that and told me. Drivers, URL, because we always do URLs in the controllers. So now, oops, if we go to drivers, we're back here. Let me jump in here and quickly create this index form for you so that we can prove what we're doing all along. Before I do that, I'm going to jump back over here and jump into the console here, and if we do driver.count, we should have one now, and driver.last, Matt Smith, me. Cool, okay. So let's make that show up here. So if we do drivers, just a naming convention, do the plural there, driver.all, because we want all of them, and then we do app views drivers index, just leave that so we know where we are, and then we do drivers.each, pass it a block, do, and then driver, the singular, because it's going to yield back each of the drivers one at a time, and then we're going to do, well, actually up here. Well, we're just going to make this really simple. We're going to do just an unordered list here. Punch you down there. We're going to go up there. We're going to go in here. It's conventional to just do one layer of indentation on every single tag level. And then we're going to do li, and then an ERB tag, driver dot first name, and then we'll dry this up here a little bit later, and then driver dot last name. And I suppose it would help to spell first right. Okay, refresh that page. Okay, now we have me right there. Okay, so let's continue on here. get out of the console there. Head back to our editor here, drivers controller. So I want to show you a couple things here with strong params. First off, we can clean this up a little bit. We can go down to the bottom of our file here and create a private section. Now anything below private will be accessible to the outside world. So we're going to do driver params. We're going to create a method in here that we can just dry that up, because we'll actually be using this in multiple places. We can straighten that up. And then up here, all you have to do is driver params. And my edge there. And now, if we go to drivers new, John Block. There we go. It still works. So one thing I want to, the second thing I want to demonstrate with here is that if we delete last name there, we can go to drivers and we can go to new and we can do Fred Flintstone, and if we do that, create driver, it'll still work, but look, the last name is missing. And if we go to our log here and go to the last post request here, we can see that we submit it with driver first name, last name, Fred Flintstone, but unpermitted parameters last name. So it warned us that it filtered that out. And so if you ever aren't getting what you think you should be getting saved into your database, that's the first place to check. All right. So now that we have those there, let's clean that up real quick. And let's do driver.last, and okay, that's Fred there with no last name, and so we're going to do driver.last destroy and get rid of him. Now driver.last should not be him, it should be John Locke. And when we refresh this page, that is what we see. Okay, so that's the basics of a form. Now let's jump into creating the nested portion of it. In order to do that, though, we need to got out of Rails console there. Here, this we're going to generate a new model. Rails G model and LIS. I can never spell that right. There it is. License. One of those things I never got right from my youth, I guess. Driver's license. So we're going to have number. We're going to make it a string, and state. And you can just leave this blank as state, and it'll by default create a string, but I still like to do string just to be explicit and very clear. So now we can jump back to our editor here, and we can go to DB, database, migrate, and then look, licenses is here. It pluralized it for us and created 2 attributes. Now this is my convention. There's a way to pass references to the model when you create it. I just like to add them manually. But t integer, this is going to belong to the driver. So t integer driver ID, singular, and then an ID. This is the foreign key to reference driver there. Okay, so now that we have that, all we need to do is, after we save it, jump back over here to our console and do, well, let me show you another thing here. Rake db migrate, but before I run migrate, I'm going to call status. This is helpful to know. So one of them we've already ran, that's what up means, and then one of them is down, that's the one we just created, db migrate. When we migrate that, then we run status again, and we can see that they're both up. Okay, now we can get off of our Google spell check there, and we can head back here to our editor. Now we need to set up the associations. So app view or models driver, and a driver has one and now I'm going to misspell the in here. Model license. So down here, license has one license, and then up here we do our belongs to driver. Okay, so that sets up our relationships now. We can close that out. And so what we want to do then, well, let's just start adding this to the form and see what happens. It's not going to work right off at the bat because we're going to run into some issues that I want you to notice. So app views drivers new, and so right underneath here, div eof dot label. Now we want number, but can we do that? Let's pull that page up. New. Okay, so number word, but let's f dot text field number. Reload the page. Now it blows up saying undefined method number for driver. So this is why this is a form builder that wraps this driver, because it's calling this method on driver. And it doesn't exist on there. So we need to do something different here. What we need to do is do f.fields for, got it right, I think, do, and then we pass license builder. So so what we can do here is instead of the F here, which is the form builder, for just the general form here, we're going to build a new builder, and it's specifically just going to be for the license. And we need to add our end and straighten this up, because a nice straight indentation will help you find errors nice and quickly. And then now we still don't want to call this on F. We want to call this on license builder. Okay, so now we're calling this on license builder. The form, okay, that works. Let's add our VR. Okay, so now we have our license number. If we wanted to make this a little bit clearer, we could say drivers. Okay, and then now div and builder label state and state, and now we have a state. So if we have failed and if we do this, it still created it, but when we go over here to Rails console, we take a look at it. Try d equals driver dot last d dot license is nil. We don't have one. It didn't create it. And again, if we go back here and look at it, what did we get? Well, it passed license and license number, but well, there's several things that are happening here on top of each other. Number one, we haven't allowed this to go through. The first issue is we haven't allowed this to go through StrongParameters. So let's create that and work through it from there. So if we go back to our controller, and we go back to this up here, we can say license. Actually, let's do that the opposite way. License, and then we can not a brace, but squared braces is what we want, and we want number, and we want state. Okay. So now if we go back here, and we do destroy, and now we do failed, and then 1, 2, 3, and WA. Type mismatch, association type mismatch. Expected a license and got license controller. And this one was a baffling one at first because I'm like, I was reading through all the documentation and it just didn't seem to make sense. This is because we missed one crucial step. What Rails will do, because we passed in license in here, is it's actually going to call the license method on the driver object, and we don't have well, we do have a license method. If we jump over here to license, that returns nil, and we also have an equals, which we can put in as nil there, or we could do drivers license.new, and then we can create a license that way, and add it. So it has a license method, but we cannot pass a bunch of I know this is just a hash here, but we cannot just pass number we can't do that. It's going to give us, well, let's see, what a association type mismatch, license, expected. So it expected a license class, but it got a hash, and that's what it's telling us here too. License expected, but it got action controller parameters, because what the association gave it was the parameters which we passed in, which is not at all what that method is expecting. And so we need to do something else to give it what it's expecting. Actually, we don't give license anything. We want to create a new method that we can give the parameters to. So app models driver, because this is the form for the driver, accepts nested mutes for license. So now now it will change the behavior of this form, and it'll actually re-render the form for us. So if you look back here now, all of a sudden our fields are missing, and that's because driver at responds to a new method now. Reload, and if we do driver dot new dot public methods dot sort dot grep license. These are all the things associated with license. We have this new method here called license attributes, and that's the method that this adds. And so now that it responds to that, Rails is going to build the form differently for us. So when we go back to our controller here, we get we have a driver here, and that's all we're rendering on this new form is the driver. Now that this fields4 knows that it responds to license attributes, it's going to look for something else. And so in order to get it to rebuild those fields there, we need to do at driver dot build license. And so now it'll have an instance for the license to actually populate the fields with. So when we reload the page, now driver's license is back. Well, let's go through this. Fail 2, 1, 2, 3, state WA. Okay, so now if we create this here and then head back here, driver.last. Driver.last. Okay, that's fail 2. License, it's still nil, and we want to know why. There's no error, but when we go down here to the last thing here, unpermitted parameters license attributes. And you'll notice that this changed from just license number and state to license attributes number and state, and that's all due to this method here, accepts nested attributes for. Okay, so we need to change some things here. We need to change this to license attributes. Okay, let's destroy that. Okay, he's gone now. New. Okay, so now let's try it. Barney Ruble. Barney R. We're going to call him Barney R because I can't think on the spot. 1, 2, 3 and WA are bedrock better. There we go. Barney R. Now if we do last license, now the license came through. So so what we saw there is that we need to use accepts nested attributes for in order to give what we want to license here and get it to use attributes. And that's the other thing that I should point out here. New. When we look at our form down here, you can see it puts it in license attributes here rather than just plain old license. That in combination with in the new, we also had to build an instance of the license for it to render here on the new form. And that's kind of the whirlwind tour there of that portion of it. I guess lastly, let's expand this application out a little bit more, and let's add a couple things here to the index page. So down here at the end, link to new driver, and then new driver path. Let's see if that works, and then I'll show you how. Oh, we're on driver already. New driver, driver's path. How does that work, you may ask? Break routes. So this is our prefix, new driver, and then we have new driver, and we did path because it's in the view here. Now, we have all that. Let's create a cancel button here. Our view drivers index new down here at the end. And driver path. Driver's path. Okay, now we have cancel. We can go back and forth. But now let's list our driver's licenses here because that's an important thing. Oh, and I also promised you that we would clean up also have drivers. The last name is kind of awkward here. So let's write the code that we wish we had, which is that just driver name. Okay, when we this, it's going to blow up because it doesn't have a method for name. So app models driver def name. If we do that, that's enough to make it not blow up, but it's not going to do what we want it to do. So down here, I'm going to introduce a new method of joining things together. We can do first name, last name dot join. This is a method on array because we're calling it on array, and we're going to pass a space in there. Okay, name, and then we are going to go back to, so that cleaned up our index a little bit, and then we also want to add the license number and state, and so we're going to just to pin this on here, and we're going to do EO driver dot license dot, let's just do the number here for now. And if we do that, we're going to get an error for nil class. And the reason is because our first driver does not have Rails G. Nope. C driver dot first nil. So it's going to blow up because there's no license does not, exist, license doesn't exist, or number does not exist on nil, because it's of class nil rather than of class license. So it's saying I can't answer that question for you. So we need to shelter this a little bit. So we're going to go up here. We're going to add an if driver dot license dot present, and then we're going to cover all that in an if statement. Now when we reload, it's going to add it for only the appropriate ones. And we could also do driver dot license dot state, and maybe we'll put that up above it. See how that looks. Bedrock 1, 2, 3. Okay, there we go. So now we've added all of that. If we want to, we can also do EO link to. We're gonna add a delete here. We're gonna call it delete, and then we're gonna do what we're gonna pass here. When we look back, break routes. We want the delete because we want to route this to destroy, so we're going to do driver and with the method of delete. So driver path, and we're going to pass actually our driver into it. We know to do that because we need to pass this ID, and so we need to pass these. If we had multiple ones, we'd pass them in order, but we need to pass the ID for our driver into there, and it'll call ID on it. So we pass that in there, and then we need to do method delete. And so now when we refresh, we can delete John Locke, no destroy action. So app, controllers, drivers, and then under our create here, def destroy at driver equals driver dot defined and params d and at driver equals dot destroy and then we're going to redirect to driver's path, or not path, you caught me again, URL. So now if we'll go back, reload the page, it's still there, John Locke, delete, it's gone. And if we want to driver's index, we can also add a data confirm. So I can't remember this off the top of my head, and I wanted to show you guys how to search for this. So I might do Rails delete confirm. Now in reality I would probably just look at another project, but this promises confirm. Okay, that's what I thought. It adds a data confirm method, and we could do this on API dot Ruby on Rails link to, I guess it does have it here, data attributes confirm and a question, and so we can do confirm and question, are you sure? Pass that there, refresh the page, and what this adds is this, so the method delete adds this data method delete, which is a data attribute in HTML5, and then the confirm here right there adds this data confirm, are you sure? And what the JavaScript helper does is it pops it up with that question, and so that question could be anything we want it to, make it a little bit more obvious there. Refresh and then delete, are you sure? Yes, I'm really sure. Okay, now it's gone. There you go. That's pretty much it. Once again, we talked about the forms here and how Form 4 works and how to build the licenses, or the license, and what was required in the controller, which we had to build the license, and then in the controller we also had to require the driver and permit the allowable attributes to be assigned to it. And in order for that, for the license attributes to come up, we had to go to app models driver, and we had to add the has one, but more importantly the accepts nested attributes for license.